All right, here we go. The MAtricks MA3 on PC crash course. Alrighty, so let's start. How about by opening up our MAtricks window? We can make it a little smaller so we can have a bigger selection grid. Okay, so MAtricks, I made a video about it a while ago. It's kind of going over the very basics of it. And so now let's do a little bit more of a deep dive in this crash course. Basically, MAtricks allow you to create some really cool looks in your phasers and effects, and it also allows you to create some cool transitions moving from one cue to another, which you can then use to make some really cool like transition into effects and stuff. MAtricks are really the basis of like the more advanced kind of programming on MA. I mean, any award show that uses MA, uses MAtricks pretty significantly to create a lot of those really cool and dynamic, lighting looks and stuff without doing a ton of work, right? All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make ourselves a little phaser here. So let's kind of stop this thing that was already running, and maybe we'll just kind of get this gobo out of there, just for the sake of seeing everything clearly here. Okie dokie. So let's come over here. We have 100, 0. Now it's kind of fading everything out. I want to make this a little bit bigger so that way I can actually see. Okay. So we have a phaser now running. We're going to hit 0 through 360. All right, and we can see that in our selection grid. Okay, so let's start this with the example that I used in my other video, and let's just do wings of 2. Now you're going to notice when you hit any sort of MAtricks item, it doesn't immediately change. You're going to notice a change in your selection grid, but not on your effect. In order to apply it on the actual effect, it's kind of what it's giving you essentially is like a little preview of what it's going to do. We have to hit our phase again. Okay, so now that you can see that we have wings of 2, essentially we're getting 2 wings of light moving towards center. If we wanted to reverse that, we could then hit 0 through 360, and now it's going the opposite direction. It's starting in the center and going out, which is kind of cool. Okay, so that's wings. So let's kind of, now straighten it out. Okay, so what are groups? So essentially groups are groups of fixtures. So you can kind of do this now. So now what you can see it's done is it's created 2 groups of fixtures, just kind of linearly assigned to, now we have a kind of an interesting look here. And so these groups are more like linearly, kind of focused. It's created 2 of them, as you can see in the selection grid. Let's kind of get rid of that. Blocks. So let's add a block of 2. Blocks are similar to groups, but they're usually in fixtures right next to each other. So you can see we have blocks of fixtures here, right? So instead of having these 2 rows of fixtures as a group, these 2 right next to each other are. Okay, so those are probably the ones you're going to interact with most, blocks, groups, and wings when you're creating effects. The other one you're probably going to interact with is the shuffle. So for this, I'm also going to kind of show you guys the Y. So we've only touched X so far. In your selection grid, you can see you have an XY plane here. So this is X and this is Y. So essentially, if you were to apply a Y wing, and we don't have a ton of fixtures here, if we had a large group or a lot of pixels, you would see it more. It will start the wings like these 2 will be at full, and then will fade out as this one fades to full. That's how Y works. It's just on a different axis. And so you'll see how that's really helpful in a second. So I'm going to use the X shuffle, which gets me like a more random like group of fixtures. And I'll hit the Y shuffle of 2. And you can kind of see here actually what it's going to do. You notice it isn't doing that yet, but it is in it here. Now I'm going to hit that. And now you can see my 3D over here that it's actually doing a kind of a cool effect, right? It's kind of a more randomized effect than it was before. It kind of looks a little bit cool. So you can see how this can be really, really powerful in your effect making. And you can combine these. That is, you could combine shuffles with wings and groups and, blocks and all that kind of stuff. Play around with it. I'm not going to go into too much detail here about those because you're going to learn best with your rigs, kind of playing around with that. Spend, 30 minutes or so and just kind of see what cool effects you can make and then store them into presets and that kind of stuff. So you can see how all of that works, which is kind of cool. All right. So now we're going to go into this cue that I've stored, and we're going to look at our next thing that MAtricks are really helpful with doing, and that's transitions. So to start this off, let's take our fixtures here to 0, and let's now add a fade of 1, 2, 3, So this is a time. It's fading from X to X in 1 to 3 seconds. A delay, let's add 0 to 1. And now let's add wings of 2. Okay, so now if we come over here, you're going to see on the dim that we have a couple different things kind of highlighted. We have a couple of different colors. We have our absolute and relative colors, so we know this contains both of that information, but it also has green and orange, which attribute to these fade and delay. So now we can hit store Q2 time, let's just say 3. Okie dokie. And clear out. And now let's watch what happens. Is that kind of cool or what? So we've just applied a effect, essentially, a transition using MAtricks to this cue, and you can tell that it has fade and delay data in there as well. So now let's say that I'll show a different example. Let's turn it back on, and from here let's do another 1 to 3, another delay, like there. And for this, let's do an X like shuffle. How about that? An X and a Y shuffle. Alrighty, and now let's store Q3 time 3. Let's clear this out. And now let's watch what happens. Our fixtures fade in a more randomized pattern. So you can see how this can help create some really cool effects. So you can use this, to make your transitions easier. If you want all your fixtures to kind of sweep in, this is the way to do that. Those are the two things that MAtricks are primarily used for. Is those transitions. So play around with that. If you haven't taken time and paused this video to play around with the effect aspect, play around with that now in phasers and stuff, and also kind of play around with the transitions. You can play around with different timings, speeds, phases, shifts, shuffles, all these kind of things. You can do that across more axes, of course. It doesn't just have to be across the X. If you have fixtures, both the Y and then in Z as well, you can do that as well. A key note about that is if you hit the reset button, it's just going to reset all of these to 0, and then the active button essentially will make your things active or not. So when you go to store something, if these are grayed out, even if they have numbers but they're grayed out, it means that it's not storing that data into the queue. So you have to hit the active button, and it'll be green if it's active, to make sure that it actually gets stored in. Okay, the other thing, if we go to pools and we go to MAtricks, you can store MAtricks. So let's say I know that I use wings of 2, an X shuffle of 2, and a Y shuffle of 2 often. I can hit store, and I can store that MAtrick, right, and label that wings plus, whatever, right? And you can do it more. The other thing that's kind of cool, if we go to our import-export menu, and we kind of go down the long row here of all of these different things that MA makes it easy for you to import, you can also import MAtricks, these pre-made kind of things, into your pools. So if I wanted maybe if I wanted these shuffles in there, I could put an X shuffle of 2 in there, like that, X shuffle of 4, whatever, wings of 2. You can see how that this can save you a little bit of time as well. I personally find that it doesn't, it's helpful, but it also means you have to have this pool open, and if you have a ton of these stored, this can become really big when compared to the compact size of this. So what I'll typically do is I'll have the effects that I use the most, the MAtricks that I use most, and I'll store those, and then maybe I'll have a couple more default ones if I'm just kind of playing around with stuff. But for the most part, I don't have this pool open with as many as my other presets and palettes and stuff. So that is the MA3 MAtricks crash course. Please like this video if it was helpful. Of course, subscribe. I always appreciate that. And yeah, I hope this was helpful.